Okay, welcome everybody to today's DASA Enterprise Leadership Conversation. And we're going to be talking about optimizing value streams. And we've got some very exciting speakers joining us today who have a lot of experience in this area. So I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about. Just to cover my name's Katrina Logie, I'm your host, and Irfan, who I'm going to introduce in a minute, will be facilitating this conversation, our research director at DASA. Just a bit of housekeeping before we start. Please do write your comments and questions in the chat, and we will be reading them out during the discussion. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So it's very important to have your opinions and participate also. We'd love to hear from you. And if in future you would like to participate as a speaker for one of our DASA webinars, it would be great to hear from you. And please, do let us know if there's any particular topics you would like to bring to this forum in particular. This webinar is also being recorded. So the agenda today, I'm going to introduce a little bit about DASA and the Enterprise Leadership Forum. And then I will hand over to Irfan, who will introduce the speakers today. And then we'll wrap up with any questions at the end. But please, as I said, this is interactive. So the Enterprise Leadership Forum is designed for knowledge sharing amongst our global community for DevOps practitioners, thought leaders, and industry experts that share how they solve specific problems in their organizations and stimulate ideas for the future. DASA is the world's largest DevOps and Agile association, fostering dialogue, debate, and collaboration amongst leading industry professionals and organizations with a network of 300 plus partner organizations. DASA helps define, inform, and advance the DevOps industry through networking, information sharing, awards, lifelong learning, and certification. And it was founded in 2016 with 300 plus partners and in 48 countries with thousands of professionals participating. And DASA offers the guidance, platforms, and community of experts to enable you to successfully navigate your transformation journey. And we do that in 4 pillars. One being guidance, and guidance by offering, materials that are created by the various working groups we have in place. These are aimed to help organizations refine their transformation journeys by learning from the successes of peers and the collective knowledge of experts. These are in the form of best practices and DevOps maturity assessments, scans, and guidance papers. And then our second pillar, communities are a powerful way to advance the movement of DevOps. And the DASA communities are designed to share new ideas, practical suggestions, insights, and lessons learned. And then we also have created a talent hub which contains, management resources designed to create a continuous learning culture for members to help map your team's exact needs to optimize their development. And then the final area is recognition and visibility, helping organizations to celebrate their successes and advancements via awards and helping organizations build employer branding to attract the right talent. So today's conversation, I'm going to hand over to Irfan Sharif, who is our research director. And we're joined today by Daniel Kuspar, head of technology at Digital Ocean Ventures, Daniel Westermeyer, who is a Kanban trainer and agile coach for Colinet, and Catherine Shaka. Am I pronouncing that right, Catherine? Shaka, yes. Who is the Senior Product Manager, VSM Methodology at Plan View. So, Irfan, I'm going to hand over to you to let the speakers introduce themselves.
All right, super. Thank you very much, Katrina, and welcome, and a very warm welcome to the participants and the audience in this for this event, as well as the speakers. We are excited you're here, and this is an exciting and a very relevant topic. Value and value stream management is becoming extremely important as we transition into the digital age and as we become digital first players. Most organizations are going through a transformation journey to achieve that goal. So this, as DASA, as an community-based and a membership-based industry body advocating and providing guidance to in agile and DevOps way of working to help shape successful transformations, as well as help organizations become digital first organizations. On behalf of DASA, I welcome you. And as Katrina mentioned, we have eminent speakers here, experts in the area of value streams and value stream management. So this is how the format of today's conversation will go. We have three topics that we want to cover off in the sequence. We want to compare and contrast the value streams in a manufacturing world as opposed to a software value stream, because there are some similarities and there are some uniqueness of value streams in a software and a digital product value stream. So we want the speakers to talk about how we make the work as well as the value flowing through that value stream visible. What is the vocabulary that is needed to provide that end-to-end visibility from the business to technology delivery and value realization? That is the first theme that we want to cover off. The second theme that we would like to focus on is within these sort of, once we've made this thing visible, how do we promote this common language? And there's thinking around that we'd like to present to this audience in terms of the flow framework as one of a proposed way of making that value visible across the business and technology sides of the organization, as well as combining with outcome-based metrics like OKRs and the front-end sort of ideating sort of decisions that happen at a portfolio level. How do we ensure that the entire value stream, from the intent to create value that happens at the ideate stage to the realization of the value by the customer as well as the business, is visible and there's a shared language across business and IT? And the third theme, which is kind of represents the evolution of Agile and DevOps. Agile broke down the silos between development teams and development organizations. DevOps extended across the entire IT. Now we have a manifestation of this need to have the business be as much part of this transformation as the technology teams have been. And this sometimes is represented as biz DevOps or enterprise agility or business agility. So we're going to talk about what are the cultural and the leadership transformations that need to happen to enable this massive transformation. Because as we know, DevOps was a huge sort of transformation in terms of ways of working, in terms of leadership styles, in terms of culture. But we are now bringing in the business into the conversation, and we want to discuss what are some of the leadership and cultural level transformations that need to happen. So with that, and just before we introduce the speakers, the key takeaways we'd like to have the audience take away from this is visibility in value streams, software value streams. How do you get that visibility? Two is a shared language through some of the tools some of the frameworks that we will discuss. And three is the cultural and the leadership transformation that needs to happen to achieve these sort of outcomes. So with that, I will now call upon our speakers, starting with Katrina, to introduce themselves. And we'll do a quick round of introductions, and then we'll follow up with a discussion on these three topics. Does that sound good, folks? All right. With that, I'll pass it over to Katrina for your introduction. Katrina.
Well, can you hear me okay? Very nice to be here. What a great organization to have this opportunity to come speak and with like-minded people and advance these topics. So very, very happy to be here. So my background is actually, I started out in manufacturing. And so Lean Six Sigma Black Belt, value stream mapping, a whole 3-day exercise, getting everyone in the room, very long time ago, before even Agile was a thing. Moved into software development, brought a lot of the lean thought with me at the time. It was very radical. No one wanted to hear about lean principles in software development. I won't age myself, but a long time ago. So doing a lot of work lately. I moved from doing a lot of agile coaching and agile transformations, as many were coming into my coaching and my practice very, I would say, just kind of disheartened. Agile had promised all of these great things, and we made these huge investments in new roles and new practices, and did a lot of change and got a lot of new tools. And we'd get a couple of years into it and still not getting the value that we wanted. So I found Project to Product, the Flow framework, and the rest is history. I now work at PlanView, helping organizations leverage some of the things that we're going to talk about today, value stream management, to bring these pieces together, build that shared language across business and technology, and start to really get measurable outcomes. So this is one of my favorite topics. Thank you very much.
All right, glad you're here, and pass it on to Daniel W. there for a quick introduction.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here, actually, and to be in the same room with these esteemed colleagues of mine. So I got a background in large projects, traditional projects, if you want. So I've had my fair share of Gantt charts and of project planning over the years. And still, when I was doing that, I felt that, okay, there has to be a better way to deal with all the eventualities of a project. And when I had the opportunity for my first sort of agile-ish project, I think this is 6 or 7 years ago, it was like, yeah, this is the way it should be. This is the way that people should collaborate. This is the way that the results we should be able to reproduce. And I made my way into Scrum, obviously, and then I started my own company at that time. Because I felt that the company that I was working for at that point was not really buying it wholeheartedly. So, and interestingly, I couldn't agree more than what Catherine said, that there was these huge promises that we had over the years, and still many organizations were struggling with adopting lean, agile / Scrum principles in a whole. So I made my way to Kanban because I felt that one of the most important topics that we are dealing with is make the by nature invisible knowledge work visible, so that we can identify constraints, we can identify bottlenecks. And also I felt that what we really need to do is to agree on a sort of objectionable observations, like metrics, if you want to call it. So because if we only argue about feelings, then what typically happens is that the higher hierarchy would win those arguments, but it's hard to argue with data. So these are the things that I try to work with my clients on: making the work visible, agree on metrics that give us an insight of whether we are on a path to success or not, and then work on towards better results. And as I said, it's great to be here.
All right, thank you very much. And last but not least, Daniel K.
Thank you very much for having me today. The privilege is mine as well. Very happy to be here. I am a practitioner, IT practitioner for over 15 years right now. Next month will be actually my 16th anniversary. I was working in IT from the very beginning, seeing multiple businesses joining and co-creating value with the multiple business partners. And I've seen multiple perspectives, starting from the construction business, afterwards shared service center, merging, acquiring. Afterwards, I went into the robotic process automation startup, which was later on acquired by one of the biggest business process outsourcing players out there. Currently, I am focusing on the venture building in the fintech and e-commerce space. The one thing that is the most important in all of those experiences is what you said. There were a lot of promises during these 16 years with some emerging methods, frameworks, like Agile, DevOps, ITIL, Lean, Scrum. I've seen a majority of them, and I was practicing majority of them. The one thing that I've noticed was this lack of common understanding of the most basic definitions of what the value actually is, and who decides what is valuable and what is not valuable. After multiple years of experience in delivering multiple services, I've noticed that the only perspective worth focusing on is the perspective of the customer. Of course, it should be aligned with the business, it should be aligned with the IT, but in the end, the customer makes a decision what is a valuable service, what is a valuable product. Even more importantly now, in the world that is running very fast, and the expectation is to deliver the highest possible quality in the smallest possible time frames, and to show the progress, to show the iteration, to show the value. The problem with that is the value is being understood in different ways by the customer, by the business, by the IT, and this common understanding and the value streams understanding is very important common language that we can have with the business. So thank you very much. This is all from me for now.
All right, thank you, Daniel K. That was a good summary. And I think in terms of summarizing some of the key points that came out of this introduction was the promise of Agile remains unfulfilled. And then while Daniel W. emphasized that making that work visible was the key, and providing some metrics and moving beyond feelings to have those conversations is the key. So let's jump into the discussion, the topic around making work visible within a software value stream or a value stream network, however we prefer to call it. The challenge is that it's not visible and it's complex, knowledge intensive work. But from the business, knowledge value is regarded as features, but there's more than features that go into making a successful software product and a software system that delivers that product. So maybe we can start with Katrina to help us understand what are the different components of value within a software value stream, because obviously it's just not features. There's things that are defect, debt, and you brought out the thing about how deferring debt might be leading to a debt spiral. Maybe we can begin with reiterating some of those flow items, as we would like to call them.
Yeah, so a lot of the work we've done with the flow framework. So we talk about features, defects, risk, and debt, which is a funny word because when we talk about debt, it's also how are you going to improve for future revenue generation. And so what's typically very, when we start to visualize the work, make work visible. If there's one takeaway from this session, it's make the work visible. From there, you can make informed decisions. And so features, the unit of value, maybe we hear user stories or different things and people talk about a unit of value, but even today in this day and age, 20 years later, after agile practices are introduced, we still struggle with the customer perspective and value. So even starting that conversation of alignment around what is a feature, what is a unit of value to our customer. A fun exercise we sometimes do is have, I'll just genericize this, have IT do an exercise, business do an exercise. What is the feature? And usually you think you're on the same page. When you turn over your your answer key, you might have some surprising results. Same for quality, same for a couple of these other discussions. So the alignment is so key of even just starting to have this conversation of what do we mean by a unit of value. Value streams start and end with the customer. And so the other thing, so typically we can have a good conversation around features, start to make that visible. And usually guess what else is visible? Defects, right? Impacting the customer. Usually there is a good telemetry or visibility around defects where we often lack visibility. And we're talking about this debt spiral. We see a lot of replatforming in companies that are not considering themselves technology companies because the debt starts to get so large, they can't deliver quickly. Their systems can't scale up to serve their customers' needs or to change quickly in an agile environment. So a lot of the work that we start to do is to start to make this debt visible. And the most common response that we get from IT or engineering is that, well, we're not paid to work on debt. And so now when we talk about value stream management and all kind of reading from the same sheet of music, having that same visibility is seeing what the impact of these decisions have, whether it's a perception or it's a reality that we're not getting paid to work on this debt, or basically things that are going to eventually slow down our value delivery. By starting to have these conversations, make it visible, we can all make decisions that are best for the business and the customer, and ultimately the employees too, right? So starting to bring that visibility, features, defects typically first visible, debt, and then risk, not like project risk, but risk to our like cybersecurity. I'm not an expert in this by any means, but I read some of the headlines and it looks like it's getting to be an increasing threat. Security concerns, risk for your customers, your brand, security, things like that. So starting, sometimes I'll talk about business agility, getting everybody on the same page. I view value stream management as, what is that page? Are we all looking at the same kind of flow?
Very well said. Right. I think it's about that sort of broad category between revenue generation and revenue protection. Sometimes the focus is on revenue generation at the expense of revenue protection, which comes back and bites you in the end. And we'll come back on the third theme around how we get this transformation from a leadership perspective and a culture, because some of the death march projects we all have been in end up creating this, but because in software value stream they remain invisible until it's really difficult to make any changes. Then we need to talk about that much earlier in that cycle, and that's why the need for the shared language. And with that sort of segue, I'll bring in Daniel W. And you touched upon some of the things and Kanban has been advocating this for a while. And as we talked, its predecessor with Agile and sort of conjoined with Agile. The whole thing was to make work visible as well as deliver value quickly and continuously, right? But getting to that promise has always been a challenge. And maybe Daniel W., your perspective from the field and how you can offer some guidance for the audience here in terms of making that visible.
Yeah, and I think in parts it has to do something with do we really have, what Catherine so eloquently said is like, okay, it starts with the customer, it ends with the customer, right? But what we cannot really do is predict the behavior of our customers. We may have a couple of hypotheses, right? It's like, okay, we believe that by doing this feature, these magical things will happen and the customers will love it and they pay us X amount of money and that, but it's still some kind of hypothesis. And ever so often, I feel that companies don't treat them as hypothesis, but as sort of like, okay, this is required. And I know that this is, I've talked with various C-level people in companies, and what I hear is like, I know that it has to be this way because I am also a customer, right? So it's sort of like a, and instead, I always advise when I work with my clients is think in a hypothesis. You're betting company money that this idea works for this customer very well, and how much would you be willing to bet on that, right? And if we are framing these things in that way, then we can not only, or we expand our thinking not only in, okay, let's deliver this feature, but in how can we test, how can we probe if this hypothesis holds water, right? And that typically leads to shorter cycles, smaller experiments, and obviously also in a lot of, oh, let's cancel this won't work. So we had the best ideas, we had the best intentions, but obviously maybe it's not the right time, but our customers won't buy into it. So, and this sort of like, in my experience, this helps transforming the idea of what is value in the first place. Because to me, it's like, first of all, we have a hypothesis on this is valuable to the customer because of X. And how can we test? How can we respond to this with a test, with a small experiment, and then put this small experiment through our value generating system and determine afterwards if this was good or not.
Yeah, and it's a good point. I think, and this is something that the product management community is really passionate about, right? And we're moving away from these outputs to outcomes, and moving away from a feature factory to actually delivering tangible impacts to the customer and behavior changes. I think it's, the continuing challenge with, especially as we talked about with enterprises that have till now not regarded themselves as technology companies, but are clearly becoming technology players, running a business on top of that. The end-to-end visibility is not there, so it's easier to kind of deliver the outputs and features and the hard conversations that are needed to make the cultural and leadership changes to move from that to outputs to outcomes is a bigger challenge. And we'll talk about that in terms of the third theme there, or the third topic. But thank you, Daniel W., for that perspective. And Daniel K., from your perspective, and we talked about value from, starts with the customers, ends with the customer, and the whole process around, as you come from the fintech and industries that are at the front end of some of this innovation, your perspective on value and the creation process.
I think that great points made by both Katrina and Daniel W. First thing that I would like to mention, the point of Katrina that the value starts and ends with the customer. I would even go deeper. The value starts with the demand of the customer for something and the realization of this value in the end. Ideally, how Daniel W. proposed in a way of the making the hypothesis and making the experiments that will prove this value even before we will create the first line of code. And this is very important to get this alignment, to get this understanding. One should always look at the customer first to understand the customer intimately. Understanding what is a daily job of the customer, what are the pains that are generated by those jobs, and those are plural, not singular, usually. What are the pains, what are the gains, how we can relieve those pains, how we can improve those gains. Essentially, if we will find the answer to the most common problems, we will have something valuable. The trick begins with this understanding, okay? If you have the other approach, and if you are going heads-on into the initiative, not asking yourself the questions or not asking the questions to the customers, researching the customers' behaviors, creating the prototypes, creating the proof of concept, measuring the value, thinking about what would be the best measurement of the value that we are delivering, it wouldn't be a good approach. And this is the reason why most of the high-level initiatives, improvement initiatives fail. There is a lack of the common understanding, and we are convinced that whatever we are planning to do will be valuable. But as Daniel W. mentioned, how much are you going to bet on that? Okay, we are working in venture building. We are working exactly in this field. Like, we are betting at one point of a time that the value is there. Of course, we are doing that by diligent research, testing, verification, even before the first line of code will be created. So thank you very much.
And that's a good point, right? I think that's kind of where it came up with the lean startup and the lean product development movement, where you said the biggest waste in software is building code that nobody's going to use. And data has proven that only kind of 30% of whatever you produce as a software product gets used. And I think this is where I think our sort of, as an advocate for and a provider of guidance for companies making the transition to agile and DevOps way of working and shaping transformation. This is we increasingly see this sort of feedback where the development teams are measuring themselves by story points and releases, and the business can't relate to that because it's a very output-oriented metric. So I think the challenge collectively is to help bring the business into the conversation. So you're not writing code for the sake of writing code, but code that will drive outcomes. So with that sort of point, I want to move into the second piece of the conversation, right? And we talked about some of the things, and Daniel Boyle, in an earlier conversation also mentioned about the capacity of the system and its ability to take in work and moving from a push-based system to a pull-based system. And what Katrina mentioned about making that work visible so the right decisions are made. and extending that sort of theme to how do we provide the business tools that are beyond story points and beyond number of releases or the frequency of releases. And I differ, and I've been a big advocate and a proponent of the flow framework and combining with some outcome-oriented metrics to help both drive lean product development as well as the portfolio management, elite portfolio management. So I was wondering, maybe Katrina can speak a little bit about what sort of perspective the flow framework provides, so that there's an end-to-end sort of visibility on value, and it's just not from code commit to code deploy, for example.
Yeah, and this is so critical because one of the biggest impediments, I measure flow day in and day out and improvement on outcomes using the flow framework. And what I have found over the years is that this lack of alignment and outcome focus is actually the biggest contributor to impediments to delivering value. So flow framework, we have our value, and value, cost, quality, and employee engagement. They call it happiness. And so when we look at value, it is a little bit difficult of a conversation, as we just covered, but it's a critical one, as many organizations may not be measuring value. So we talk about fast feedback and all those things, but it's almost, we talk about test first in IT. It's almost starting like a measure first. How will you measure the feedback and the benefits from your customer? These are organizations, 20, 30,000 people in IT. They might feel very far away from the customer. So how can we get that telemetry built in and look at it certainly no less frequently than monthly, right? And this sounds strange, but sometimes we never look at it. We allocate a budget for a business case, and as long as the work is performed, well, there must be value. So also looking at the cost is like it's a secret in a lot of organizations, but there's a lot of talk about moving to this the fixed team capacity or fixed budgeting. What are we getting for that money that's being spent? That is one of the biggest questions for business and finance, of how they come into the flow framework and starting to share this shared language, rather than assuming that we're getting what we expected to get. Basically, I'm gonna exaggerate a little bit here, but basically we paid the teams to come in and write defects, and then we paid them to fix them. And starting to take a hard look at, now we see why debt is important, paying down that debt, right? To be able to enable our teams to produce quality work. So looking at the cost, looking at the quality, and certainly the employee engagement. I hear engagement surveys are sent out once a year. Engagement is at an all-time low. Certainly we want to have these conversations more frequently, because we still do have a lot of specialists. We're seeing organizations struggle to get talent in, which of course impacts the speed and the quality. And if you have them, how to keep them, right? The great, employees are leaving companies. So having those front and center in, let's say, whether you're doing an agile cadence or you're doing some sort of traditional cadence, chances are you have roles and meetings, even if it's monthly, right? Hopefully more frequently than that. But having these conversations, how are we trending towards those outcomes? And in the flow framework, we have not only the flow metrics and how they're responding, but also keeping an eye on these outcomes. That's kind of shared language.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. No. Thank you, Katrina. And going to Daniel W. there, and I think when you talked about this within the context, and tying in what Katrina said about employee engagement, and that is one facet of some of the challenges that are in the space, as well as in contributing to that is that consistent reporting that a lot of these transformations are not delivering value. So you have, on one end, you have employee engagement that's dripping, as well as you have poor return on your investments in your transformations. So, and something that Daniel W. pointed out earlier on is having that visibility into the capacity and the capability of the system, plus having the courage to make those choices up front, so that you're making those, you're not pushing work into the system beyond its capacity, which obviously leads to challenges with the employee engagement, but also in clogging the system. Maybe Daniel W., you can pick up from there and talk about your sort of view on this topic.
Yeah, what I typically see in organizations is like it's one big mess of queues, so to speak, like one big mess of waiting lines. So it means to give an example, it's like, okay, person A needs something from person B, and person B is just like fundamentally busy, and the only thing that she can do is put that request into her waiting queue, right? And then at one point in time, let's say 1 week or a couple of days later, she'll get back to it and she answers the question and sends back to the original requester. And since that person has already moved on, since, I mean, we don't want to sit around waiting for a reply, right? So that person has already moved on. So what happens is that reply goes into my waiting queue, and at some point I'll pick it up. And you see where this leads to, right? And when we look at the work in a visible system, what happens is like, okay, we work on it a little bit and it waits for a couple of days. We work on it a little bit and it waits for a couple of days. And if I look at the flow efficiency of the individual work parts, what I see is like, I don't know, 95% of the time work sits idle, sits waiting for somebody to pick it up. And that in turns will lead to that uneasiness of our stakeholders, of our C-levels. We are saying, I was only asking for a small feature and it takes us months to deliver. What is happening here? And that will in turn, in my opinion, lead to increased pressure on the delivery teams, right? It's like, can't you do that work faster? But if we're talking about, let's say, a half day of work that sits idle for 2 weeks, what good will it do if we can speed up or if we can cut down the active part of the work to 2 hours? Okay, then it sits then for a waiting or for a customer perspective, it's still 1 week, 4 days and 5 hours, right?
Mhm.
So I think the biggest leverage that companies have is cutting down the waiting time by far, and not trying to cut down the active touch time.
All right, thank you. And I'll pause a little bit here. Katrina, I believe we had a question from Martin. Do you want to address that?
Yeah, so it looks like Martin asked, talking about technical debt, how would you make it visible? How would you measure it? So we take what I would call a unique approach to technical debt because it's such a sometimes vague topic. So when we have visibility and when we're able to measure flow, we're able to see where the system is slowing down. So certainly we can start to visualize debt, some static, dynamic, tool checking things, but even things to say, if we see that all the time, kind of a systemic thing that we see is that work gets through, value gets through development quick, but then just sits in release and test, even in 2022. We talk a lot about CI/CD, but that's not a reality for a lot of customers still. So where would we would say, I want a focused investment on speeding that part of the system up. That would be a prioritized, we'll call it, value or backlog item or initiative, however you talk about work flowing through your system. But we say we need to make that visible, this debt. Why? Because the whole system is slowed down here in tests. We need to start upskilling our organization on, let's say, test first development or BDD or different techniques. And so making it a priority, making it visible, making that investment, that's the type of way that we tackle debt, rather than for the sake of tackling technical debt, seeing where we want to speed that system up, a little bit of theory of constraints for those that are interested in those topics, and making that targeted investment in debt.
All right, I think that you got a thumbs up there. And in the interest of time, I want to get Daniel into the conversation on this theme. So over to you, Daniel K., for your thoughts.
Fantastic conversation, by the way. When Daniel W. was mentioning these queues, it is so true. It is so true. The problem, I think, the root cause of this is because of the business as usual challenges. And as Katrina said, usually a lot of people in the organizations are doing work, not thinking about the bigger picture of where actually they are helping to co-create value for the customer. It may be because they don't understand the customer. It may be because they don't understand the vision of the organization. It may be because they don't understand the mission, strategy. they are so used to doing the things that are easy and that are not challenging, that they are happy with the status quo. And when Daniel W. was mentioning about these queues, first in, first out versus last in, last out. And what I am seeing over and over again is last in, last out. And essentially who is screaming the loudest is getting the priority for the work to be done, and not focusing especially on the customer, on the value. The most important thing I think to mention here is actually that the people come first. Your people come first. Your people understanding what you are building, for whom you are building, what you are doing, what problems are you solving, how you are co-creating this value. This is important. This is the most important thing there is. Aligning it with the vision, aligning it with the KPIs from the business, like net promoter score, like revenue, like return on investment, like churn, like customer base growth. Those are all valid metrics that can help you to understand what is working for your customer, what is the customer willing to pay for, and how you are helping to ease some pain or create some gain for this customer. Thank you. This is all from me.
Yeah, and thank you, Daniel K. And it kind of leads into our sort of next topic there, Anand, or theme that we want to cover off with you. And I'll pause for a bit. Katrina, are there any further questions or anything else that you want to bring up here from the audience?
Well, only just Abdullah, who talks about the process owner most of the time is not ready to deliver and point out all the requirements.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think we'll cover that off now in this sort of topic, right? And we talked a lot about how do we get this cultural and leadership sort of change done to bring the sort of the business and the customer perspective into technical work. And one of the things that came out loud and clear was that we have to move away from outputs to outcomes, and we have to focus on the wait time versus trying to reduce the active time. And the question of technical debt has to be understood from the business's side, right? That this slows down your ability to deliver features. And as you said, I mean, there was nobody was paid to reduce the amount of technical debt, or there's no project that gets kicked off to do that. But in contrast to the digital sort of the tech organizations, where there is a very deliberate attempt to pay down technical debt, so you slow down to speed up. That whole sort of mindset shift that the business needs to understand the vocabulary of software, because pushing stuff into the system will not make it faster. And the question around how we get this sort of language, the shared language, build upon it and bring that business into the conversation, and executives who are not natively software engineers, so don't come from that background, to understand and appreciate the technology point of view, and from the technology side, from the coders to the system admins, understand that we're not here to write code for the sake of writing code. We're here to deliver some business outcomes and customer outcomes. So I wanted to get your opinion from you folks, and that kind of also addresses Abdullah's question around the process owner is not ready to deliver, right? So how do we kind of make that sort of change in mindsets and behaviors and cultural sort of transformation? Sometimes it gets kind of overlooked, and there's an assumption that somehow magically it'll happen because now we have two pizza teams, right? It doesn't. And as you said, like this was a small feature I asked for, but it's taking forever. So maybe, Catherine, from your experience in the field, maybe you can talk about what are some of the changes that need to happen both at the executive level, at the business level, as well as the technology teams level.
Yeah. I love how you say it's not magic. It won't manage itself. If we're waiting, it's not coming. Like, we have to be the change. So this may or may not be popular or controversial, but typically what gets people's attention first is time and money. Those are typically concepts that get people's attention. We have a shared language on that. So as we start to make the work visible, we can see what it's costing us not to take action, let's say in debt. So we'll say, oh, we can't afford to do that. Oh, no, you can't afford not to do that. And I can show you with the data. And then what's super interesting is how quickly finance, I would say more quickly than even the business, starts to perk up and say, oh, so that's where our investment is going. You know, largely development has been a black box. And we always talked about, oh, the business is certainly going to be interested in getting visibility. Finance actually beat them, I would say, to the race to start to say, people are coming asking for these investments. How do I know? Where are my investments going? Cost of delay, to watch that clock actually ticking, right? And getting from that shared language is typically the first way that I see that people, we get attention, start to be part of that conversation. How often do we talk about ARR with developers or revenue or things like that? Not very often. So we're left, certainly we want business to see our trade-offs, right? We just talked about that with debt, but are we also bringing the same kind of business perspective to the teams? Very often these are foreign concepts. So slowly, using these cadences, using something like the flow framework or something similar, right? A simple kind of interface or language to have these discussions, making it visible. What is it costing us? What opportunities are we gaining when we do take those action? Starting to celebrate and show the wins, that if you actually do some of these, we talk about having too much, we make it visible too much in the system. The only option it has with these cues is to age, to increase your time to market. There's nowhere for it to go. And so by starting to show that, we can have the right conversations for the business and in terms that finance, business, and developers. It's kind of I like it because it's a win-win-win for everybody. We solve it for the business, we solve it for the customers, we solve it for the employees by starting to focus on those items.
All right, thank you. And I think, Katrina, there was a question, right, Katrina, around the lead time and cycle time. I think Katrina has also addressed that. I think the way to kind of understand that flow from the point of intent to create value at the ideate stage to actually realizing that value and making that entire lead time visible, and that language that spans both the business and technology becomes crucial to reducing that lead time.
Yeah. And that's so important to understand, is we're so used to, not a right or wrong or good or bad. It's like we need all of these things. So very often we'll see development time, great. You deliver, the development team delivers in 14 days or 30 days. When we zoom out, we see that companies are delivering easily in 200 or 300 days. It's not the development team that is the constraint. We see easily 100 plus days before it gets to development, and very often easily 55 to 100 days after it leaves development.
Agreed.
So if that's not visible, we're solving the wrong problems, making the wrong investments.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I believe we addressed that question that came up, Katrina. So thank you, Katrina. And so Daniel, in your perspective on some of the changes that have to happen at a behavior or a leadership and a cultural sort of level to enable this fast and efficient flow of work and value.
Yeah, I think, and I love that Catherine was addressing like constraints and theory of constraints, because theory of constraints tell us that, first of all, every system, literally every system, has a constraint, period. So, and that means our whole system cannot produce results, or in that matter value, faster than the constraint can. But in turns, it also means that every other activity part or resource has excess capacity that we're not going to use. And I think it's important for leadership to understand that part and to put the focus on the work, not on the people, trying to pressurize them to deliver more. So it's more like, okay, if we have our focus on the work, then we can see all those things that Catherine was mentioning, like, okay, we see that it takes 200 days until it gets to delivery, and then they're required to go faster, but they cannot catch up with all the time that has already been spent, right? So, and in that case, I believe that resource optimization is the wrong way to go. It's flow optimization that we have to go to, even with all that uneasiness that it'll produce in our decision-making people with it. Yeah, okay, but this costs money and that person is not producing anything right now. So, and I agree. It costs a company money if we having people not busy. But on the other hand, and this is why I love that Catherine was mentioning the finance people, but we have to do a counter calculation, and that is, how much will it cost us if that person is not available because of busyness when we need it, or when we need her?
Mm-hmm. No, a great point, Daniel. I think the point around the understanding that system constraint and that the flow of the ability of the system to deliver is going to be always constrained by that, and focusing on that requires some courage and some visibility on the data and making those choices. True. and optimizing for flow versus optimizing for resources. And I think that's one of the sort of imperatives of the digital age right now is time to market, and that sort of thinking that has to shift with that. It's okay if people are not working at 100% capacity, but we are delivering the right outcomes. And that is kind of the capacity that you have for innovation and thinking, and slack time you have for additional work, right? Additional sort of value to the business. So with that, I will come back to Daniel K. And Katrina, how are we doing for time? I believe we have another 5-10 minutes left, so we should be all right. So Daniel K., over to you, my friend.
Thank you very much. One more time, great points. Let me touch on the most important one. There was this mention that the technology companies like Amazon, like Apple, like Google, like Netflix, we all know those beautiful brands, and we know the quality and the value of the services they are delivering. They started somewhere as well. And recently I heard very interesting and I think very valid opinion regarding the market and the global market, and irrelevant from which vertical you are looking at. All companies should become the technology companies. You cannot afford not to have the technology in the core of what you are doing, or at least acknowledging that there is technology there that can be leveraged, utilized in order to bring more value faster. Of course, easier said than done. There are a lot of technical debt in these organizations. There are a lot of conflicting priorities for the different silos and so on and so forth. But in the end, we need to build this common understanding. We need to align under the single banner of the vision, mission, strategy, and the thing that we want to accomplish. And we all want to do the meaningful work for sure. There was one point regarding what Daniel W. said. Not resource optimization, but the flow optimization. I couldn't agree more. I was seeing that on the daily basis in the robotic process automation business. And essentially, there was a lot of customers who were coming with this technical debt, with the legacy services, thinking that the automation is a solution to their problem. It is not solution to the problem. If the process does not perform, if we don't measure the outcomes of the process on the stages that are being followed, if we are not optimizing this process, and we will try to automate this process, the only thing that we will accomplish is to get the bad results, bad outcomes sooner and faster. Great, but it is still the patchwork, you know. It is still not solving the problem, and it is because of narrow perspective. One last thing that I want to mention: the best example of the outcome-based approach in a lot of businesses that I see right now. They are not in the majority, but there is a trend of 4-day work week. I think you are familiar with the trend. I very like this approach because essentially what is being said to the employees, you are being measured based on the outcomes, not based on how much time you spent on the single task. Thank you very much. This is all from me.
All right, thank you. And we have a question. I think it's a way we can wrap up with this because it summarizes the essence of the challenge that businesses face, right? Is it possible to understand the customers completely, or is the onus on the business and the people creating products to come up with products to drive and help customers. And I'd like to have your opinion on that. And this goes back to the lean startup moment as well. Like you test an hypothesis and you say if customers are willing to pay for it, and then you build the whole thing. Maybe we can, if anybody wants to take a stab at it, given that we have 5 more minutes left, I'll leave it open to any one of you who want to jump in and answer the question.
I'll jump in because I'm newly in the product management role. So this is near and dear. I can't say enough about the fast feedback. So a lot of products they're new in the market. Even value stream management is new in the market, and tools are new in the market, and training around it, right? And so getting that fast feedback, customers, we're trying to understand what problem we're solving for them. And some of them may not even realize, let's talk about value stream management. We know there's a problem, but what is the problem, right? Not delivery, or it's about delivery. And so getting that fast feedback, and what you learn from customers is they'll use tools and things in a way that you never even anticipated, and being able to capitalize on that and then getting closer to their needs. So I think that question very much made me smile, because getting in there with the customers and learning and getting that fast feedback takes that product, or helping solve their need so much quickly in that direction, rather than assuming that we know what customers need and want.
Can I jump in on this one? I very like, yeah. The question if you can understand the customer is very philosophical question, and I believe you can. I know the real life examples when the CEOs of the well-doing MarTech companies, and not only MarTech companies, but this is an example that I think of, are jumping into the first line of support, of the product support, of the customer support, in order to work with the customer to understand this customer better. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, there is no better way to understand your customer than to speak with your customer directly. And it shouldn't be like that we have multiple firewalls, project management office, CEO, secretary, essentially firewall, filtering some information that may be very valuable for the better understanding of the customer perspective. So my answer to this question, if you want to know your customer, speak with your customer. Thank you very much.
Yes, and I think you, in a way, you answered this question as well, as the close collaboration that needs to happen, right? To essentially the product teams and understanding the customer. So hopefully we've covered that as well. Thank you for posing that question, and we'll pass it back to Katrina for some closing remarks. We are close to the top of the hour here.
Oh, the classic. You're mute.
There we go. Sorry. There's so much to cover in 1 hour. So thank you all for your participation today. And it has been great hearing from Daniel, Catherine, and Daniel W. as well. Please, if you do have any more questions for each one of them, do reach out to them on LinkedIn, because they'd be happy to connect and answer any more questions that you have. And just, there was a recommendation here. There's a great book for Patrice Coulbard recommended a book called Making Work Visible. I don't know if you guys have read that. Yes, they're all thumbs up. Brilliant. And Anit mentioned about domain-driven design, Wardley mapping, and team topologies to understand systems thinking. Would these tools help to understand, generate, and optimize flow? So that is a question to answer. But I think we're about out of time, aren't we, Irfan?
Measure flow as well.
Yeah, measure flow, and I mean everything that helps to look and observe a system in a holistic way to achieve global optimization instead of local optimization. Anything will help.
Yeah,
wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful.
And thank you for the participants, and thank you for all those questions and some great takeaways from that. And that's one of the sort of value propositions of a community-based and a membership-based organization and an industry body like DASA. So please reach out to us to continue this conversation. And Katrina is there, and I'm around. So we are on LinkedIn or the main DASA website as well. So with that, folks.
And or not to forget to mention our next event also, Irfan, which will be happening on the 27th of October, measuring software delivery performance with DORA, DevOps Research and Assessment. So please do join us for the next one. And thank you all again for participating and for all the audience for asking questions. Great session.
All right. Thank you, folks.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
All the best.
We'll be in
Thank you very
touch.
much. Thank you for having me. It was great.
All right. Bye.
Bye bye.
Okay.